Imagine you wake up one morning, check your bank account, and everything is gone. Not because someone broke into your house, not because you were robbed at gunpoint, but because a man in an expensive suit sitting in a glass office tower signed a document that destroyed your life savings, and he did it legally, or at least he made it look that way. This is not a scene from a movie. This happened to thousands of ordinary people in the 2008 financial crisis, when some of the most powerful banks and investment firms in the world engaged in deliberate, calculated fraud that collapsed the entire global economy, and almost none of the people responsible went to prison. That is the terrifying reality of white-collar crime. It does not look like crime, it does not feel like crime in the moment it happens, but when you follow the consequences all the way to their end, you find devastation on a scale that no street criminal could ever achieve. Today, we are going to go deep into this topic, slowly, carefully, and with real examples, because white-collar crime is one of the most misunderstood, underestimated, and dangerously ignored forces shaping the world we live in right now. Before we can talk about the implications, we need to make sure we understand exactly what white-collar crime is, because the term is thrown around loosely and people often have a vague, incomplete picture of it. The phrase white-collar crime was first coined by sociologist Edwin Sutherland in 1939, and he defined it as a crime committed by a person of respectability and high social status in the course of their occupation. The white collar in the name refers to the dress shirts that business professionals and office workers wore, as opposed to the blue-collar workers who did manual labor. So right from the beginning, white-collar crime has always been about crimes committed by people with power, status, and access. It includes fraud, which is when someone lies or misrepresents information to gain money or advantage. For example, a CEO who falsifies his company's financial reports to make the stock price look higher than it really is, which is exactly what Bernie Madoff did for decades when he ran the largest Ponzi scheme in history, stealing approximately $65 billion from investors, including charities, pension funds, and ordinary retired people who trusted him with their life savings. White-collar crime also includes embezzlement, which is when someone who has been given access to money or assets uses that access to secretly steal. For example, an accountant at a small business who slowly, quietly transfers small amounts of company money into their personal account over years, hoping no one notices. It includes insider trading, which is when someone uses secret, non-public information about a company to make stock trades that give them an unfair advantage. For example, if a pharmaceutical executive knows that their company's new drug is about to fail clinical trials before the public announcement, and they sell all their stock before the price crashes. It includes bribery, corruption, money laundering, tax evasion, and corporate espionage. All of these crimes share a common thread. They are committed not through physical violence, but through paperwork, phone calls, emails, and the quiet abuse of trust and authority. Now let us get into the real implications, because this is where the story becomes both shocking and deeply important. The first and most immediate implication of white-collar crime is the sheer, almost incomprehensible scale of its economic damage. The FBI estimates that white-collar crime costs the United States alone between $300 and $600 billion every single year. To put that in perspective, all of the street crime, burglaries, robberies, and thefts combined in the United States cost roughly $15 to $17 billion per year. That means white-collar crime causes somewhere between 20 and 40 times more financial damage than all traditional crime combined, yet it receives a fraction of the media attention, law enforcement resources, and public outrage. Think about that for a moment. We as a society spend enormous energy being afraid of street crime. We lock our doors, we install security cameras, we worry about our neighborhoods. while an entirely different category of crime is happening at a scale so massive it is almost impossible to comprehend, and it is happening in boardrooms, banks, and government offices. A powerful, real-world example of this economic devastation is the Enron scandal of 2001. Enron was one of the largest and most celebrated energy companies in the United States, valued at over $60 billion, with thousands of employees and millions of shareholders. Behind the scenes, Enron's executives, led by CEO Jeffrey Skilling and founder Ken Lay, were using a network of fake offshore companies and creative accounting tricks to hide billions of dollars in debt and inflate the company's profits artificially. When the truth finally came out, Enron collapsed virtually overnight. 20,000 employees lost their jobs, retirement savings of employees and investors, money people had worked their entire lives to build, evaporated. Pension funds that had invested in Enron lost hundreds of millions of dollars. Entire communities that depended on Enron were devastated. And this was just one company, one scandal. Multiply this pattern across industries, across countries, across decades, and you begin to understand why economists and criminologists argue that white-collar crime is one of the greatest threats to economic stability and prosperity in the modern world. The second major implication of white-collar crime goes deeper than money. It corrodes the very institutions that societies depend on to function. When corruption and fraud become normalized within powerful institutions, banks, government, regulatory agencies, corporations, the entire system begins to rot from the inside. This is sometimes called institutional decay, and it is one of the most dangerous long-term consequences of white-collar crime. Here's how it works. When a politician takes a bribe to approve a lucrative government contract, the wrong company wins the contract, not because they were the best, most qualified, or most affordable, but because they paid the most. This means public money is wasted, public services suffer, and the democratic principle that government should serve the people is quietly undermined. Over time, if this becomes common, citizens stop believing that the system works for them, and they are right. A remarkable example of this comes from the developing world, where the World Bank has estimated that corruption costs developing countries approximately $1.26 trillion every year. This is money that could be building schools, hospitals, clean water systems, and roads. Money that instead disappears into the private bank accounts of corrupt officials. In countries like Nigeria, where massive oil wealth has been systematically looted by government officials and their corporate partners for decades, the majority of citizens remain in poverty despite the country sitting on one of the largest oil reserves in the world. The implication here is profound and heartbreaking. White-collar crime does not just steal money, it steals futures. It steals the possibility of a better society. And the damage compounds over generations because institutions that are corrupted become incapable of self-correction. They protect the criminals within them because the criminals have become the institution. The third implication is one that rarely gets discussed, and it is the social and psychological cost of white-collar crime on ordinary people and on society as a whole. When people discover they have been defrauded, when they realize that someone they trusted has stolen from them, the damage is not only financial. The psychological impact of financial fraud on victims is well documented and severe. Studies have shown that victims of investment fraud and financial scams experience rates of depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress comparable to victims of violent crimes. Bernie Madoff's victims did not just lose money, they lost their sense of safety, their ability to trust, their retirement plans, their marriages in some cases, and in tragic instances, their will to live. Several of Madoff's victims took their own lives after losing everything. This is the hidden human cost of white-collar crime, the suffering that never makes it into the financial statistics. Beyond individual victims, white-collar crime erodes the social fabric of trust that makes modern economies and societies possible. Think about how markets work. They're built entirely on trust. When you invest money in a company, you are trusting that the financial statements you read are accurate. When you deposit money in a bank, you are trusting that the bank is managing it responsibly. When you buy a product, you are trusting that it performs as advertised. Every major white-collar crime scandal chips away at this trust, making markets less efficient, making people more fearful, and ultimately making the entire economic system more fragile and less functional. After the 2008 financial crisis, surveys showed that public trust in banks and financial institutions collapsed to historic lows, and decades later, that trust has never fully recovered. The implication is that white-collar crime does not just harm its direct victims, it poisons the social environment for everyone. Perhaps the most troubling implication of white-collar crime is what happens, or more accurately, what does not happen, when the perpetrators are caught. The justice system's response to white-collar crime has historically been dramatically different from its response to conventional crime, and this disparity is both a symptom and a cause of the problem. Consider this. In the United States, the average sentence for a first-time drug offense involving crack cocaine, a crime often associated with poverty and marginalized communities, can be 5 to 10 years in federal prison. The average sentence for white-collar fraud, which can affect thousands or millions of victims, is typically far shorter, and many white-collar criminals never go to prison at all. Instead, corporations pay fines, which sounds significant until you realize that for a company making billions in profits, a fine of even hundreds of millions of dollars is simply a cost of doing business. After the 2008 financial crisis, which was caused in large part by deliberate fraud in the mortgage and derivatives markets, exactly 0 senior bank executives from the major Wall Street firms were convicted and imprisoned. The banks paid billions in settlements. JP Morgan Chase paid $13 billion in one settlement alone, but the money came from the bank's profits, not from the individuals who made the decisions. The executives kept their bonuses. This is what criminologists call the too big to jail problem, and its implications are devastating because when powerful people face no real consequences for their crimes, the implicit message to the world is that the rules do not apply equally to everyone. This breeds cynicism, fuels inequality, and most dangerously creates moral hazard, meaning that executives are incentivized to take reckless, fraudulent risks because they know the rewards will be personal while the consequences will be absorbed by the company, the shareholders, or the taxpayers. The fifth implication connects all the others and operates at the largest possible scale. White-collar crime is one of the most powerful engines of global inequality. When wealth is systematically stolen, hidden, and concentrated through financial crime, the gap between the rich and the poor does not just grow, it is engineered to grow. The Panama Papers, revealed in 2016, showed the world how wealthy individuals, corporations, and political figures from more than 200 countries were using offshore shell companies to hide trillions of dollars from taxation. The Paradise Papers and the Pandora Papers followed, each time revealing a vast, interconnected global system of financial secrecy that allowed the ultra-wealthy to operate by entirely different rules than ordinary people. The implication is staggering. If the money hidden in offshore tax havens were taxed at normal rates, the additional revenue could fund universal healthcare, universal education, and poverty elimination programs globally several times over. White-collar crime at its highest levels is not just a violation of the law, it's a structural mechanism that keeps wealth flowing upward and opportunity flowing downward generation after generation. So where does all of this leave us? White-collar crime is not a background issue, not a technical matter for lawyers and accountants, and not a problem only for the wealthy people who invest in the stock market. It is a force that touches every single person's life, through the quality of public services, through the stability of the economy, through the fairness of the justice system, through the health of democratic institutions, and through the distribution of opportunity across society. The man in the expensive suit who signs the fraudulent document does more damage to more people than any street criminal ever could. And the most dangerous thing we can do is continue to underestimate him. Understanding white-collar crime is not an act of cynicism, it's an act of clarity. When we see these crimes for what they are, in their full complexity and consequence, we become harder to deceive, more demanding of accountability, and better equipped to build the kind of society where the rules truly apply to everyone equally. The first step in changing the system is refusing to look away from it, and that begins right here with exactly this kind of conversation. Stay curious, stay critical, and never stop asking who benefits, because the answer to that question will almost always show you where the real crime is hiding.